Get pulled into a vivid vortex of intense emotion, where every twist of the narrative leaves you breathless and wanting more. This is storytelling designed for the modern viewer who craves quality and cinematic depth. Hit subscribe now and don't get left behind in the storm of drama.
I didn't cry when the judge read the verdict. I'd used up every tear I had 3 years earlier, standing in my mother's kitchen, watching my brother pour himself another glass of wine and tell me I had no claim to anything. That was the moment I stopped being the good one and started being the smart one. Let me back up. My mother raised 2 kids on her own after our father left when I was 4. My brother Clint was 7. She worked double shifts at the hospital, came home smelling like antiseptic and exhaustion, and still managed to make us lunches every morning and ask about our days every night. She was the kind of woman who kept a running grocery list on the refrigerator and never once let it run to zero. Dependable, steady. She built everything she had from scratch, and when she finally got sick, really sick, not the manageable kind, she needed someone to be there. Clint was busy. He was always busy. He'd moved to Atlanta 14 years ago to build his brand, which as far as I could tell meant wearing expensive watches and attending networking events. He called Mom on holidays and sometimes on her birthday, if he remembered the time zone difference. When she was diagnosed with early-stage Parkinson's, he sent flowers. A bouquet of white lilies that she was allergic to. I threw them out before she could see them. I was the one who moved back home. I was 28, working remotely as a project coordinator, and I told myself it would only be temporary. That was 4 years ago. 4 years of doctor appointments and medication schedules. 4 years of learning which foods triggered her tremors, which chair was easiest for her to stand from, which pharmacist would call ahead when a prescription was ready. I rearranged my entire career around her needs, and I didn't resent it. I want to be clear about that. I loved my mother. I still do. But I also learned something during those 4 years. Love is labor, and labor is invisible to people who don't want to see it. Clint visited twice in 4 years. Once when she was first diagnosed, once when a specialist appointment happened to coincide with a conference he was attending in a nearby city. Both times he stayed at a hotel. Both times he left within 48 hours. Mom handled her own affairs for as long as she could. She'd set up a revocable living trust years before her diagnosis. She was always practical like that. And she kept meticulous records of everything. The house, a savings account, a small investment portfolio she built over 30 years of careful decisions, nothing extravagant, just the kind of quiet wealth that takes a lifetime to accumulate. When her condition progressed, she asked Clint to serve as trustee. She told me privately she did it because she thought it would force him to step up. She believed, even then, that if she gave him responsibility, he would rise to meet it. I didn't say what I was thinking. I just nodded and made her afternoon tea. She died on a Tuesday in March. Quietly, in her own bed, which was what she wanted. I was holding her hand. Clint arrived the following Friday. He walked into that house like he was touring a property he was considering buying. He opened cabinet doors, pulled back curtains, examined furniture. He didn't cry. He didn't ask me how I was doing. He asked where Mom kept the paperwork for the house. I told him it was in the trust documents, which the attorney had copies of. He nodded like I'd said something obvious and poured himself a drink from Mom's cabinet, the good bourbon she kept for guests, and stood at the kitchen window looking out at the backyard. "You know this house is technically an asset of the trust now," he said. "Yes," I said, "I know what a trust is." He turned to look at me then, and something shifted in his expression. Not guilt, more like a calculation running behind his eyes. "We should probably talk to the attorney together," he said. "Get on the same page." I agreed. I thought that was the right thing to do. I was still operating under the assumption that we were on the same side. I was wrong. The meeting was scheduled for 2 weeks later, at the office of the trust attorney, a woman named Beverly who had known my mother for over a decade. I arrived early. So did Clint, which surprised me. He'd also brought someone, a man in a Navy suit who he introduced as a friend with some legal background. I didn't catch his name. I didn't know yet that I should have written it down. Beverly walked us through the trust. Mom had left the house to both of us jointly, with the investment portfolio split 60-40 in my favor. The 60 reflecting, as she'd written in the accompanying letter, the years of care and sacrifice that have no market price. She'd seen it. She'd named it. I had to press my hands flat against my thighs to keep from shaking. Clint's jaw tightened when Beverly read that part. His friend in the Navy suit wrote something on a notepad. "What's the timeline on liquidating the house?" Clint asked. Beverly explained that it wasn't required to be liquidated, that we could discuss options, including one of us buying the other out. I'd like to continue living here, I said. I've been here for 4 years. My life is here. Your life is here because you didn't build one anywhere else, Clint said, not unkindly, which somehow made it worse. Beverly gave him a look. He didn't notice. We didn't resolve anything that day. Clint left the meeting and called me that evening from his hotel room. He said he'd been doing some thinking. He said that he appreciated everything I'd done for Mom, truly, but that he felt the trust distribution wasn't equitable given that the house had appreciated significantly and his share of the portfolio didn't reflect that. He wanted to renegotiate. I said I didn't think renegotiating the terms of our mother's final wishes 2 weeks after her death was something I was willing to do. He said he'd have to get his own attorney involved then. I said goodnight and hung up. Over the next month, I received 3 formal letters from a law firm I'd never heard of, contesting the trust distribution and alleging that my mother had not been of sound mind when she updated the trust 18 months prior, which happened to be after Clint's second and final visit, and after he'd apparently had a long phone call with her that I didn't know about until one of her friends mentioned it to me in passing. I sat with that information for a few days. Then I started going through Mom's things. Not because I was looking for anything specific. I was sorting, the way you do when someone dies, and you're the one who has to figure out what to keep and what to let go. I went through her desk, her filing cabinet, her bedside table. I found birthday cards she'd saved for decades. A photograph of her and my father, young, before everything. A small notebook where she tracked every one of my brother's phone calls, dates, times, how long each one lasted, like she was trying to prove to herself that he was still present even when he wasn't. The last entry was 14 months before she died. After that, the pages were blank. I also found something she hadn't meant for me to find. Or maybe she had. I still don't know. It was tucked inside an old cookbook on the kitchen shelf. A folded piece of paper with her handwriting on it. A list of dates and amounts. Transfers from the trust account. Not large amounts individually, but regular. Monthly, sometimes twice monthly. Going back almost 2 years, I checked them against the trust bank statements I'd obtained as a co-beneficiary. Some of the amounts matched, some didn't. They were slightly different, like someone had been skimming incrementally, varying the numbers to avoid a pattern. I'm not a forensic accountant, but I know how to read a spreadsheet and I know what embezzlement looks like from a distance, and what I was looking at had that shape. I called Beverly. She asked me to come in the next day and bring everything. Beverly spent 3 hours with those documents. She referred me to a forensic accountant she'd worked with before. A quiet woman with reading glasses and the kind of stillness that makes you feel like she's already 10 steps ahead of whatever you're about to say. The accountant spent 2 weeks on the trust records. What she found was that over the course of 22 months, just under $40,000 had been moved out of the trust account through a series of small, irregular transfers. The trustee authorization on each one was Clint's digital signature. Beverly filed a complaint with the state bar. She also contacted the district attorney's office. I didn't tell Clint any of this. He was still pushing the legal challenge, still sending letters through his attorney, still calling me occasionally with an increasingly friendly tone that made me feel like I was being managed. I was polite. I scheduled a second meeting. I acted like we were making progress. The morning of the meeting, I drove to the mediator's office downtown. The mediation had been Clint's attorney's idea, a neutral space to discuss a resolution. I wasn't against it. I talked to Beverly. I knew what I had. I just needed to be in the room when it landed. I parked 2 blocks away because the lot nearest the building was full. I was walking the last stretch when I noticed a man stopped at the corner, a cane in one hand and a manila folder tucked under his arm, staring at the crosswalk signal like he was waiting for something that wasn't coming. He was older, mid-70s I would have guessed, with the kind of posture that suggested he'd once been very tall and was only now beginning to negotiate with gravity. He was wearing a gray blazer that fit him well and holding the folder carefully, like the papers inside mattered. The light changed, but the curb cut on the other side was blocked by a delivery truck that hadn't finished unloading yet. The driver was completely indifferent. I watched the man with the cane evaluate the situation and decide, wisely, not to attempt it. I asked if he was heading somewhere specific. He said he had a meeting on the 14th floor of the building across the street. He said it with the particular tone of someone who is accustomed to things going smoothly and is very calmly furious that they are not. I said I was going to the same building. I offered to wait with him until the truck moved and then walk with him. He accepted without making it a big deal, which I appreciated. The truck moved. We crossed. I held the lobby door. In the elevator, I mentioned which floor I was going to, the ninth, for the mediation office, and he nodded and said 14th. What kind of meeting? I asked, more to fill the silence than anything. He paused before answering, which I noticed. Oversight, he said. I didn't ask more. The elevator stopped at 9. I wished him a good meeting. He nodded and said, with what I can only describe as a quiet precision, I hope yours goes the way it should. I thought it was a nice thing to say. I didn't understand it yet. I walked into the mediation suite and found Clint already there, sitting across the table with his attorney, looking relaxed in the way that people look relaxed when they think they have the upper hand. He smiled at me. It was the smile of someone who had already decided how this would end. Beverly was there too, which surprised him. He leaned over to his attorney and said something quietly. His attorney's expression didn't change, but his posture did, slightly. The mediator introduced everyone, explained the process, and asked if either party wanted to make an opening statement. Clint's attorney went first. Competent, smooth, all the right language about equitable distribution and his client's legitimate interests and the question of whether the trust amendment had been made under undue influence. Then Beverly placed a folder on the table. She didn't open it immediately. She introduced the forensic accountant's name and credentials first. She explained what the analysis had found. She set the number on the table, $38,400, and described precisely how it had moved. Clint stopped, looking relaxed. These are serious allegations, his attorney said. They're not allegations, Beverly said. They're documented transactions with your client's authorization on every one. Clint said he could explain the transfers. He said there had been a misunderstanding about how the trust account worked. He said Mom had verbally approved the amounts. His voice had taken on a new quality. Not quite panic, but adjacent to it. She approved them verbally, I said. To you, with no documentation. While she had a progressive neurological condition. He looked at me. For a moment, I saw something I hadn't seen from him in years. The face of my actual brother. The one who used to sneak into my room during thunderstorms when we were kids. Then it was gone. The mediator called a brief recess. During the recess, the door opened. A man from the building's management team came in and quietly asked if anyone was expecting an associate from the state attorney's office. Beverly said yes. He nodded and stepped aside, and two people walked in. One of them was a woman in a dark jacket who introduced herself and showed identification. The other was the man with the cane from the elevator. He didn't look at me at first. He was scanning the room with that same quiet attention, the same stillness. Then his eyes landed on Clint, and whatever was in his expression, it wasn't neutral. He introduced himself. He had been, for 11 years, the senior supervising attorney in the state attorney's office for financial crimes. He'd retired 18 months ago. He was currently serving as a special advisor to the Bar Oversight Committee, which had received Beverly's complaint 6 days prior. He had reviewed the complaint personally. He was the one who had contacted the Attorney General's office. He was also, he said, a personal friend at my mother's. They'd known each other for 22 years. She had called him 14 months before she died and told him she was worried about the trust. She hadn't known what to do. He'd advised her to document what she could and to make sure the trust documents were as specific as possible. She had done both. The woman in the dark jacket asked Clint and his attorney if they would like to continue the mediation or if they preferred to address the matter through a different process. Clint's attorney asked for 10 minutes to confer with his client. They took 15. When they came back, Clint looked like he'd aged a decade. His attorney said his client would be withdrawing the legal challenge to the trust and making full restitution of the amounts identified in the forensic analysis, and that they would cooperate fully with any investigation. The woman in the dark jacket thanked him. She said cooperation was noted. I didn't say anything. There wasn't anything to say. The man with the cane, my mother's friend, who had met me at a crosswalk on an ordinary morning and walked across the street with me, caught my eye as people were gathering their things to leave. He gave me one small nod. I thought about the notebook I'd found in her bedside table, all those dates and times, all those calls she'd logged. The last entry, blank pages after. I understood something then that I hadn't before. She hadn't stopped keeping records because she'd given up. She'd stopped because she'd made her call. She'd put it in someone else's hands. She'd done what she could and trusted that the rest would find its way. I sold my apartment lease 3 weeks later. I'm still in her house. The chair that was easiest for her to stand from is still in the corner of the living room. I haven't moved it. I don't think I'm going to for a while. The investment portfolio is mine. The house is mine, after buying out Clint's half at fair market value, which Beverly helped me arrange so that I didn't have to interact with him to do it. His attorney handled his side. I handled mine. I heard through a mutual cousin that the bar is still reviewing his conduct. I don't know what will come of it. I don't spend much time thinking about him anymore, which is its own kind of resolution. What to think about when the house is quiet and the evening comes in through the kitchen window is my mother at that desk with her notebook, writing down dates and times, counting the calls that came and the ones that didn't, building a record of something no one else thought was worth recording. She saw everything. She knew exactly what was happening, and she made her plans accordingly. I come from her. I should have known I would too. I've thought a lot about what made the difference in the end. Not the forensic accountant, not the legal filing, not even my mother's old friend showing up in that mediation room. Those were outcomes. What made the difference was a series of quiet choices made by ordinary people who decided, at various points, to do the right thing even when no one was watching. My mother kept a notebook. She logged dates and times and the lengths of phone calls from a son who called less and less. She wasn't doing it out of bitterness. I know her well enough to know that. She was doing it because she understood something I was still learning, that the truth needs a record, that love without documentation is just a feeling, and feelings don't hold up in a room full of attorneys. She also made a phone call 14 months before she died to a man she trusted, and she told him the truth about what she was afraid of. That took courage, real courage, the kind that isn't loud or dramatic. It's just someone sitting with a difficult thing long enough to finally say it out loud to the right person. I think about Clint, and I don't feel what people expect me to feel. Not rage, not satisfaction, not even sadness anymore. Not really. What I feel mostly is a kind of tired clarity. He made choices. Every transfer, every ignored phone call, every hour he didn't spend sitting with our mother, those were choices, and choices accumulate. They build a structure, and eventually you have to live inside it. What I learned from watching all of this unfold, slowly, over years, then suddenly, in a single afternoon, is that integrity isn't about grand gestures. It's about what you do when the situation is inconvenient and no one is keeping score. I drove my mother to appointments because she needed someone to drive her. I tracked her medications because if I didn't, no one would. I did not do these things expecting a reward. I did them because they were the right things to do and because she was my mother, and she had given me everything she had. And I think that's the real lesson, if there is one. Not that good people always win. I'm not naive enough to believe that, but that how you show up in the ordinary moments is exactly what you're building your character out of. Clint built something too. Over 14 years of distance and disregard. He just didn't realize he was building it, or what it would eventually cost him. The man with the cane held that folder carefully because the papers inside mattered to him. He came to a meeting on behalf of oversight and accountability because that's what he'd spent his career caring about. He walked across the street with me because I held a door open. Small things. None of it dramatic. All of it adding up to something that changed the outcome of my life. I still have my mother's notebook. The last entry is 14 months before she died, and after that, blank pages. I used to find that sad. Now, I think she just finished what she needed to write and moved on to the next thing. She made her call. She did what she could. She trusted that the rest would find its way to the right hands. It did.